Welcome back with us here on Leaders of Tomorrow. Tonight, we're continuing our conversations as far as the opportunities in the green economy are concerned for India's entrepreneurs. My second interview tonight is with Ankit Jain of StepChange, talking to us about how they're working with some of the largest companies to help them transition to net zero faster, what they mean by carbon accounting, and also what the benefits are really of becoming ESG compliant, which is a good to do, not a must to do at this point. It'll soon become that. What are the opportunities? What are the challenges? All of that in tonight's conversation. Listening. Ankit, thanks so much for joining us here on the Leaders of Tomorrow, Season 11, talking about really something that has become now an essential conversation to have, not just a nice conversation to have, and that's as far as the green economy is concerned and what entrepreneurs like yourself are doing to really, in some sense, really capitalize on the opportunities, but also to walk the talk when it comes to green living in the green economy. Before we come to talking about green accounting, carbon footprint, and what companies are doing towards that, my first question, just help us understand a little more about StepChange. We are here in your office in Bangalore, really trying to understand the opportunity which exists and how you're really playing in that field.
Sure. I'll just also quickly introduce myself. My name is Ankit, and my background's I've been a technologist most of my life. Used to run an electric vehicle company before starting StepChange about 2 years ago. So what StepChange is really trying to do is help consumers and companies find their path to net zero and accelerate their path to net zero. Right? Net zero, as you would agree, is becoming mandatory to some extent, right? We know the world needs to move to net zero by 2050. Governments agree on that, and hence most large companies, financial institutions are starting to set those goals. As they set those goals, they will need help in making that transition happen. What decisions can they take that are more sustainable? How they can change their operations, how they can move to a more sustainable supply chain. So that's what we help with. We call ourselves a climate decision-making tool company.
Okay, so you're talking about net zero. For those of our entrepreneurs who are wondering, where are we at in India when it comes to moving towards net zero? What are companies doing? What are small businesses doing? I know it's a lot to pack into one answer, but just give us the brief response to that to say, where are we on this path?
So first of all, starting from the top, the government has set a net zero goal for 2070, right? They've also set certain goals for 2030, right? We have NDCs of 45% reduction in carbon intensity of our GDP, right? That's a big goal, and that's a very near-term goal. So the government has essentially started asking large organizations as a starting point to start moving towards net zero. The way you see that is SEBI has mandated that the top 1,000 listed entities in India have to report their ESG for the first time this financial year. And the moment you start reporting, you're expected to start reducing. Right? As a responsible company, you cannot be reporting your emissions and just showing increase. Right? So as soon as that happens, we will start to see a lot of the large enterprises starting to move. As they start to move, they will ask their supply chain to start moving, and that's when we'll see SMEs, which are, I would say, a few years away from really starting to move towards net zero.
Let's talk about what you mean by carbon accounting and really keeping that in mind for small businesses. And perhaps we can break it up as we're talking about the big ideas for a new India when it comes to the green economy. What are the 2 or 3 things that you think are really going to change the way business is done? First and foremost, let's talk about, like I mentioned, carbon accounting. What is that? How is it going to work? What should companies keep in mind?
Any type of action a company does leaves some sort of environmental impact. Right? Employees coming to office, your business travel, you're burning fuels, whether it's diesel in your cars or in your generators, using electricity, which is... So any action, things you buy, the way your products are consumed leaves an environmental impact. So you have to figure out some way of measuring all of that impact. So there's a GHG protocol which recommends exactly how you go about measuring it. There's something called Scope 1 emissions, Scope 2 emissions, Scope 3 emissions. Right? Scope 1 and Scope 2 are directly in your control. They are within sort of your boundary as a company. And Scope 3 extends beyond that boundary. It includes your employees, it includes your suppliers, it includes your consumers, etc. So when you think about carbon accounting, you first start usually with Scope 1 and Scope 2. And that's mandated by SEBI for the largest companies. And that's where most SMEs will also start. Scope 3 will start happening 1 or 2 years down the line as companies build systems, build the capability of really starting to measure scope 3. And that's where companies like us come in, right? Is how do we help you not just with your scope 1 and 2, but also the complex scope 3 emissions, which are quite hard to measure.
But what are going to be the benefits for me? Are there any financial benefits? Are there any cost savings? What would you have to say?
There are a lot of benefits, right? And of course, depends on the context of the company. For certain companies, this is just their future, right? If you're an automotive company, right, you have to move to electric vehicles. You cannot just keep making ICE vehicles.
Yeah.
Right? So that's
So
just
for your very
part of it.
existence, you
for
need
your very
to-
existence,
sure.
you need to move, right? For certain other companies, it will become about brand, right? Consumers care about the environment. They want to buy more sustainable products. So you're seeing a lot of apparel companies talk about sustainable fashion. So that you'll see a lot of consumer companies starting to do this more because consumers will start moving. If you don't do it, you lose market share.
Sure.
Right? For many others, it will be a mix of compliance and cost of capital. Right? So if you are an ESG compliant company, if you are scoring well on your ESG ratings, you will see that it's easier for you to raise equity. You can raise debt at lower costs, right? And that's how you really start benefiting financially from being a more ESG compliant company.
What are the challenges though? As you're moving to this different way of working like we're talking about.
So when you think about green economy, and specifically in case of companies, the challenges are the following, right? One is just measuring where you stand today. As I was saying, scope 3 is incredibly complex. But if you don't understand scope 3, you can't really transition to being to net zero, to being a green company. So that's one challenge. Second is challenge around talent. Where do you find people who even understand all of this?
Yeah.
Right? And how do you train them? How do you hire them? All of that has to be figured out. The third is moving and becoming more sustainable internally. Right? Actions you can directly control, right? How can your employees become more sustainable? How can you use more renewable energy? How can you move into your own operations? The fuel that you burn can be. And lastly, which is what you were alluding to, is how do you make your supply chain more sustainable, right? So if you're an EV company, where do you get the batteries from? Where do you get the motors from? How do you get all of that sorted? I think that is, the transition is going to be the biggest challenge of the all. But I think the intent is there, right? At the top level, at the company level, most boards that we've talked to are talking about this. They know this is the future. So that's half the battle won,
Okay.
right? And now it's really about starting to make it happen on the ground.
What is going to be the role of technology, AI, digital, when it comes to ESG?
Every subsector of the economy, whether that's banking, whether that's different types of manufacturing sectors, whether that's FMCG, whether that's textile, all of them will have to transition, and technology will enable that.
If you had a piece of advice for any of our entrepreneurs?
My advice to my fellow entrepreneurs would be to take any subsector of the economy you understand deeply and find a way to get that to net zero. Right? The opportunity is everywhere, right? And the challenges are immense. But if you can solve that challenge, the economic opportunity also is amazing.
All right. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.